Good evening, members, ladies and gentlemen, officers. Welcome to the first Planning Policy Committee of the new council. Please bear with me while I go through the standard safety options. There are no planned fire drills for tonight. If, however, the alarm goes off, please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the grassed island in front of the main entrance of the building. That's where you go. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. I would also ask you to switch off or turn them to silent your mobile phones, please. Please note that this meeting will be live streamed where proceedings are capable of repeated viewing if you wish. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Once finished speaking, can you please switch off your microphone to avoid feedback noise? If you are seated in the public area of the chamber, it is likely that your image might be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image being part of the broadcast. Just making you aware. If members are, for any reason, not present for the whole debate on any item, they will not be allowed to vote on that item. May I remind members to declare any interest and the nature of the interest at the beginning of agenda item, and that on declaring a pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Adrian Eves, and he's being substituted by Councillor Wilson. Are there any more absence? No, I don't think so. Are there any non-members in attendance? We have a parish councillor and a district councillor. Thank you. We've got those. Okay. Next one up is item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 2024. Members, are you agreed the minutes are a fair recording of the issue? That's agreed, thank you. Declarations of interest, item 4. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Mike Septo.
Yes, Chairman, just to record that I am a Essex County councillor and also a member of the Barling Parish Council.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Ward.
Member Rayleigh Town Council.
Councillor Wilson.
Member Rayleigh Town Council.
Thank you. Any more? Thank you. Item 5, public questions on notice. None have been received. Members, before we proceed to debate the main items of the agenda, on tonight's agenda, I would like to refer you to an email that I sent to committee members and an email that Democratic Services sent to all other member councils to advise that due to the new NPPF, that's the National Planning Policy Framework document, having been released from the government for consultation earlier this week, it has been decided that items 7 and 9 on tonight's agenda should be withdrawn from debate because the impact will impact both of those items. Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may just ask a couple of questions around that. With regards to the NPPF, will this committee be part of the consultation? Will it come to us as part of that process? And as members, will we have a copy of that document so we can go through it in preparation?
Okay, Mike, thanks for that. I'll be looking to Jonathan to explain a little about what we know already. We've only had a couple of days to read through. There's an awful lot to be researched and drilled down to get the detail yet. So it's going to take a bit of a time. So, Jonathan, would you like to add a few words to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the consultation, obviously, as alluded to, it is quite far-reaching and affects all local planning authorities in terms of their preparation of local plans. So hence why we've had to withdraw those two items on the basis that this is going to impact upon potentially the delivery of the local plan as originally envisaged. So yeah, there's just over 100 questions that have been posed in that consultation that we'll need to consider the response to, and any other points that we may need to raise in that response by the deadline of the 24th of September. And certainly, yeah, we can consider how that's, obviously we can involve members in that in terms of providing the opportunity to input into that process. And yeah, certainly take the point on board around copies of the document. We can look to provide those.
Carry on, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just come back on it, Chair. Will we, as a committee, will it come to us as part of that consultation? And if so, will we be able to have a working group, as we're going to be discussing in a little while, to actually go through those particular questions so we fully understand what's going on?
I could touch on. Mike, the email I sent to you and all the other members asked you to pencil in a date in August the 28th. That gives the officers a chance to assess the impact of this, the extent of it, and where we got the magnitude of the answers that we've got to give. I noticed I read it once through myself, and there is an awful lot of questions in the consultation that have got to be responded. So that is why I mentioned in that email, please pencil in the 28th of August for a working group, and the venue and the exact time will be following shortly, and then we'll address the questions you've made, really. That will be a chance to update all of us in one go.
Thank you, Chairman. That clarifies what I thought, but I wanted to clarify.
Cheers. Oh, Councillor Ward?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Are we likely to consider it will impact the timetable?
Yes, that's why item 7 has been withdrawn tonight, because the timetable there was based on one thing. It's now going to have to be heavily revised on another thing, which will affect the timetable, that's for sure. Thank you. Probably as the public didn't have an email from me, I ought to just give you a rough idea of why we're at this point. Although the items 7 and 9 I'll withdraw from debate tonight, they are still available in the public domain via the Council's CMIS page under the heading of Meetings and Events. You can view the 7 and 9, well, you can review all of the stuff that's on the agenda. I was on the agenda tonight. So I want to assure you that information's available, but clearly it's impacted, and that's why it's been withdrawn. So I hope you understand. So I do owe the public apology for the late short notice, i.e. now, me telling you what's happening. But it's really moved very quickly in a couple of days, and it's an awful lot of reading we've had to do to get to this point. So I hope you'll excuse that short notice. Councillor Ward?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just one item, realistically, which relates to the Gantt chart. It would be very useful if the timelines were put above each item or particular section. It's right at the top, and you have a whole section. It's extremely minuscule and difficult to actually navigate. So it would be very, very helpful if the timeline bar can be moved to the various places above the various items. It makes it easier to understand exactly where the timelines are on each item. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, fair point, Councillor Ward. I was actually thinking of talking to the officers about the format in general, actually. It is a bit laborious backwards and forwards and up and down the page and so on. So, yeah, we'll do something on that. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Not doing very well tonight. We move on to the original agenda now with item 6, which is Planning Policy Working Group. Members, we will now consider the report of the Director of Place proposing the continued use of a Planning Policy Working Group made up of members of the Planning Policy Committee. The report begins on 6.1. Director of Place, Ms. Emma Goodings, would you like to say a few words on that, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So I think this report hopefully is quite self-explanatory. So as Councillor Cripps said, in order to assist the committee in discharging its functions, this paper proposes formalising the working group, planning policy working group. So the Planning Policy Working Group will take further detailed updates on key documents and evidence. It will have detailed presentations on those reports from officers and also from consultants. And it will give an additional opportunity to ask questions of officers, to analyse public and stakeholder comments, and to provide that further space and time for members to consider items which are of relevance to the local plan. However, to be very clear, the working group is not a decision-making body, and the introduction of the working group does not change the formal nature of this group, the terms of reference of this formal committee and the members of this committee. So the proposed membership of that planning policy working group is the membership of this committee. But what we are proposing is that those papers are available to all members on request should they wish to see any papers, presentations and notes which are produced as part of those working group meetings. So there are some proposed terms of reference for the planning policy working group. Those are set out in Appendix 1 to your report. And the recommendation is therefore to approve the establishment of the Planning Policy Working Group with the same membership of this committee. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on what you were already saying about the next working group, we've got some indication of what we're going to be covering. Can we have some indication as we go forward at the different working groups what subjects you're likely going to be covering on those groups? That's to give members the sufficient time to do their own research behind the scenes before they come along to the working party. And also, it would be useful if we could be able to have some input into the subject matter. For example, to give you an example, S106 agreements and how they work and what they do, whether those sorts of things can also be included within the process.
Okay, Mike, thanks for that. Actually, item 7 included the schedule and it did define various working groups, timelines, dates and formal meetings as well. So, albeit the document parked to one side at the moment, if you go through that, it will give you a feel for the scale of the meetings that we'll need to get through it, and that might even go up now in the light of having to redo stuff to some extent as well. So I think that gives you an idea, but unfortunately that the timelines now are going to be out of sync with the latest situation. But yeah, when we revise that, it will spell out all those as you've requested. Yeah, okay. Councillor Newport, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you, Chairman, Councillor Steptoe just raised an issue and was mentioned Section 106, and I just ask if he could put that into context of what he believes Section 106 in planning policy terms we might be discussing, because as far as I'm concerned, Section 106 is discussed within Scrutiny and Performance Committee. Thanks.
Mike, would you like to respond?
Yes, Chairman, I just felt that it was useful as part of the planning policy for us to have an understanding of how that process works. Yes, like everything, it is always subject to scrutiny, and that can go to scrutiny at any time. But it's around updating all of the things that we actually ask for. The S106 system is a few years old, and it's become a little bit clunky, in my opinion. And I think it needs to be looked at to update, bring it up to modern standards, and how we go forward in a modern society, taking these matters forward.
Okay, actually, the other item that's deferred tonight, item 9, which is the infrastructure development delivery plan, actually starts the conversation on not only 106, but SIL and the levy and other members. So it will surface naturally by that document. Officer Gooding.
Thank you. So as it stands at the moment, the terms of reference of the working group are, the purpose of the Planning Policy Working Group is to consider documents, evidence and the draft local development plan and associated documents. So it really is quite tightly drawn around that local plan element of planning policy. So the development of say, a SIL schedule or the IDP, as you say, as part of that would certainly be considered within those terms of reference. But the wider section 106 around spend of money that we've already got, what is coming in through planning applications, etc., that is outside of the scope of the terms of reference as they're currently written.
Thank you. I'm confident that via the infrastructure delivery plan that all the appropriate subjects are going to come up. But I take your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep a check on that as we go forward.
We've got again. Anybody else on that one? Or are we there? Okay, thank you. Members, I will now move a motion that recommendation 1, as set out on page 6.1 of the report, be approved. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Newport, thank you. Are there any more questions on that subject? Okay. Members, we will now proceed to the vote on the recommendation by a show of hands. It will be the usual favour, against or abstain format. So those in favour, please raise your hands. I'll make that unanimous. Thank you. Please declare, I declare that motion is carried. Item 7, as previously explained, has been withdrawn. So we move on to item 8, the open spaces study. Members, we will now consider the report of the Director of Place presenting the key findings, conclusions and recommendations of the Council's most recent open space study. I will just make the point that this is the second time round for this report in this committee, and the main purpose of bringing it here tonight is to be happy to find the members are happy that all their previous comments have been incorporated. That's the purpose. So I'm going to hand over to Officer Dan Kudler, and he's going to introduce the situation now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. So item 8 is the 2024 update of the open space study, an item which was previously presented to this committee in August 2022. This study is part of the evidence base for the new local plan and builds on and replaces the previous open space study, which was published in 2009. The intention is that this will inform the local plan by providing a baseline for current provision of open space across the district in terms of its quantity, quality and accessibility, and critically define settlements and wards in the district in which there are deficits. This is important for the new local plan as it will help guide future development in such locations to help provide new open space to address some of the shortfalls and which will benefit both new and existing communities. I appreciate the key messages of this study have already been presented at the previous committee and that there is both an extensive committee report and the appendix accompanying this item. So I intend to be brief in this evening and focus on what has been updated about this item since August 2022. This is chiefly in response to member feedback, as well as a general update on significant changes in open space provision in the last couple of years. So firstly, the study has been updated to provide new, more legible mapping. Previously, the size of the maps within the report were often very small. They showed a lot of confusing overlap of different various accessibility radii around public spaces. And if you're looking at Rayleigh, for example, and the different open spaces within that, it was very, very confusing to see what was actually being presented. So this has been simplified and an interactive online mapping resource provided to allow readers to switch on and off different layers and look at the areas they're most interested in and the types of open space they're most interested in. There is also on page 91 of the appendix report a full set of the general accessibility radii across the district. Next, details of new open spaces that have been added to the list since the 2009 study and as well since 2022 are listed in sections 4.26 to 4.28 and table 12 of the appendix, which is page 62 to 71. After that, so we were at the previous committee, we were asked to better define what accessibility actually meant within the report. This is a term used in national planning practice guidance to refer to reasonable walking distances people might travel to an open space, but we understand that accessibility can often mean reference to other things like disability access and so on, which is a bit confusing. So we've sought to clarify this in section 3.33, page 41 of the appendix, just to draw that distinction. And finally, a comment in 2022 focused on the fact that a lot of the newly delivered open space, both within, since 2009 really, is privately owned and managed, so delivered through, as a consequence of new development, albeit with an obligation for public access. And we have acknowledged this in section 4.28, page 63, just to reflect that when we talk about open space within the reports, a good degree of it is actually private. I will just finish by saying that any prospective site allocations in the new local plan should consider how development can help address issues with deficiencies in terms of quantity, quality, or accessibility of open spaces, particularly where an increased population in that area stemming from new development would exacerbate existing issues. So this could be in the form of delivering new open spaces or enhancing existing ones. The plan should consider, alongside this study, other key pieces of evidence, such as the playing pitch strategy and the built facility strategy, which will be emerging, both of which the council is looking at commissioning. So thank you.
Members? Anybody questions? Councillor Steptoe, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask a little bit about woodland. Now, I may have missed it within this fairly weighty document, so please forgive me if I have. Some of the maps that you have used within the document, it chops off part of the Rayleigh end. Okay, I can understand you chopping off the bit on Foulness because it's a slightly different thing. And I couldn't see on the drawings, in particular, two pieces of woodland that I believe are owned by the district council. One being, and I don't know what it's called, but as you're driving up the A127, you're coming towards Rayleigh Weir. There's the woodland on the left-hand side by the cutting. It's that woodland there. So I'm not sure what it's called. The other piece is adjacent to Grove Wood, next to the Angular Water sewage plant, which is a piece of ground that was bought by Rochford District Council when it came up from south from Angular Water. Again, I couldn't see it on the drawing. I may have missed it, so please forgive me if I have.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. And yeah, it's interesting, this report, in terms of what is mapped and what isn't. We generally, the study generally, and we inherited a set of criteria from the previous study, but generally it looked at open space, which was kind of generally accessible to the public. But what we have reflected in the report and what we need to acknowledge is that actually there's a huge network in the district of local wildlife sites and other kind of nature reserves, sites of ecological importance, which we haven't formally logged as open space, but actually are really important for green infrastructure, for biodiversity, for nature, and they do have paths and public rights of way through them which people can enjoy. So that is a wider part of the network which we have acknowledged in the report. I think the spaces you reference, one of them is it Kingley Woods? I'm not sure which I can't remember whether we had that one in there or not. I think I remember about it, but I'll have to check, and I'll give you an update on the status of that one. I know that one belongs to the Woodland Trust, I think, or managed by them. Okay, thank you. The other piece, we do have a lot of Grove Woods in there, and then a lot of the adjacent woodlands are kind of picked up as part of the wider sort of Cherry Orchard Country Park in the orbit of it, but I will again check just to reflect that. Yeah, thank you. But certainly, certainly we acknowledge the kind of tremendous importance of that extent and tract of woodland in Rayleigh.
Mike, you want to speak again?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd be grateful if you would, and I acknowledge Councillor Newport's comments
Also,
about that piece of woodland.
Just to say, we appreciate the mappings for the purpose of the report and the printout. It does chop off parts of the district, and that's why we sought to have the online resource as well, so people could kind of look and zoom in and focus on specific areas, because we don't want any of the district to be left off in terms of being viewable. But just what you can print out and how you can fit it into an agenda pack is quite challenging.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up. It has been a case over the years where pieces of ground have been found that wasn't transferred when the two councils were amalgamated together many years ago. And we have on occasions found pieces of land. So it needs a little bit of research on that as well. So
Thank you.
So Dan, if there's anything you find you've got to add there, would you be happy to roll that into the final version?
Yes.
I know Mike wants it specifically, but you've got to check it to see whether you're going to put anything or not. If not, it just goes to Mike now.
I'll take a look and and follow up with you.
You happy with that, Mike? Yeah. Okay. Members, any points? Councillor Hoy, please.
Sorry. Thank you for bringing this back. It was August 22. I noticed that we asked a few questions on it. Yeah, it does explain about private, public much better. There are open spaces which aren't mentioned on here which could be available to the public, such as playing fields, school playing fields, which might be appropriate or not, I don't know. I'm still uncomfortable with, and I don't think we mention or identify enough open spaces which are not publicly accessible. So we've got on page 8.7, item 8, and I know there's further maps in the appendices. We've got 3 golf clubs on here, which they are not publicly accessible. There might be a footpath across them, but that's all. And I think to understand it more, if we're talking about open space, that's fine. But if we're talking about publicly accessible open space, it's very different. And you are talking about how far it is to access these places as well. So if you can't access the golf club, and the golf club has thrown people off the land before if they're not on the footpath, I think that's confusing, shall we say, and it gives misleading figures to what's publicly accessible. Also, can I ask, with the playing fields policy, for instance, I know it says we'll have a certain number of football pitches or cricket pitches. Obviously, with Parks for Nature, we are starting to lose some of the recreation ground, which may have been designated a football pitch. It's now going to be Parks for Nature, and I'll give an example in my own ward where the recreation ground in Holbridge is shown in here as football, but a large part of it's now going to be put over to 600 trees and wilding of the grass. So it won't be available for football in the same way as it previously was. Certainly the whole area isn't. So in some ways it's possibly it's better open space to use possibly, because it's not just for football and it's not cut within an inch of its life. But I don't know how you're dealing with that, because that's not the only area which will be having parts of nature, is it? And I was trying to add up the open space in the new estate on Holbridge, and I can't get to the 6.2 hectares that's supposed to be there. So I'll be interested to know if there is 6.2 hectares as per our local plan or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. So on the point about school playing fields, yes, they do play a very important role. They can be hired by the public on occasion. I think within the methodology we do mention that they're not specifically looked at in this open space study, but that's something which I understand the playing pitch strategy will consider, because they do play an important role. Do take a point about golf courses and, to be honest, other private sports facilities, which we do look at in there. I think the reasoning for their inclusion is that members of the public, if they are paying, for example, can sort of hire such spaces, can pay to use such spaces, and they do provide a degree of leisure and public amenity. However, they are private in nature. As you said, some have footpaths and things, which means that people can access parts of them, but you're entirely right. There are caveats there, and we have sort of mentioned that in the report. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. What else was there? Parks for nature. That's not something I'm too familiar with. I don't suppose we know whether the playing pitch strategy might be able to draw that kind of thing out, or whether it's an engagement with sort of our environment director, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of where you mentioned, obviously, where sports pitches are going to be lost or changed in the sense of over to nature, I think that's something that we probably would want to pick up through the playing pitch strategy, because that's specifically around the provision of sports pitches. I guess in terms of your point, it's probably just making sure that we've captured the fact that, or alluded to the fact that that's possible in terms of the nature of open space could change. And that's always a possibility, hence why we've obviously done a lot of updates to this report in any case. So I think it's always a moving piece. But yeah, I certainly think in terms of any sports provision that we probably need to point towards the yet to be commissioned play pitch strategy, which would capture that as a whole, as well as any other sports pitch provision.
Ian, if you don't mind, I just want to jump in front of your turn, because I want to talk about that particular point. Okay. I'll just share with you, I did speak to Dan about a week ago when I read the open space report, and I brought up the subject of diminishing football pitches due to that, and the fact that we seem to be struggling to meet the need for football pitches in general, due to the condition of some of the playing fields and so on. And Dan explained to me then that this playing field strategy would address that as an item in its own right. All I didn't really get was, is that going to be a standalone document, or is that going to be within the infrastructure document, or will it be a standalone document?
Yeah, so it would be a standalone document. Clearly, all of these documents, where relevant, would need to be reflected in the IDP if there were any provisions that were required that obviously subsequently need to be identified as a contribution being needed. But yes, it would be standalone, and clearly we'd need to work very closely with Sport England on that, because they set up the parameters on that work. So any consultant that we commission would have to make sure they're following those guidelines.
Mike, the thing is, keep your eyes peeled for the playing field strategy. That is, I brought it up, you've brought it up. So not only the pitch availability, but the potential loss of pitches if we don't control the wild inside of stuff. So I think, good point, as I brought up earlier. Now for Councillor Worsley's time. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, Chairman, some years back, there was a study on need and use of football pitches, which I believe you should have somewhere in your archives of evidence that was going forward. Possibly it needs updated, but from what I recollect, the need and use had actually gone down, hence the wilding of some of these areas. So if suddenly it has changed, maybe you need to look need and use again. but from what I understand, that need and use hasn't changed.
I know the report you're talking about. I think it's about 2 years old, and that's why I picked it up, because it was explaining that the condition of some of our playing fields is what gives a false impression that there's no demand for them, but they're not playable. Several of them are not playable, which is why they're not getting used. So I think that's created the impression that there's no demand, but there is very much a demand, and it's growing. So that's why I specifically pointed to that standalone thing to address all of the issue there.
If I may just correct that, the whole of that concept of changing was because need and use did not fit together. So
Yeah, I take your point.
there was at that time, if it's changed 2 years down the road, fine, then we need to address it. But at that time, need and use necessitated the fact that there was a change in the use of those areas because they weren't being used, irrespective of the fact they weren't being cared for. There wasn't a need and use.
Okay, well, what prompted me to actually look into that was incoming from residents or clubs seeking pitches on quite a large scale and struggling to find them right across the district. So I think it's worth a look at that, because with female football taking off very rapidly, this one club came to me with a 17 pitch requirement, which is quite significant for one club. So I'll leave that to come out via that custom built document. Thank you. Any other points? Mike Steptoe, please.
Yeah, just talking about football pitches, it just springs to mind the Southend United training ground is within our side of the boundary in Sutton. Is that included within the system?
No, that one is not picked up in this report. I think because it constitutes an elite sports facility, and we don't have it in there as a result. But it might be worth acknowledging that it's not in.
Carry on, Mike.
If I can come back on that, it is under new owners, and my understanding is, yes, they want to use it for their training, obviously, but they're also looking to hire it out to clubs as well. So I think it's something perhaps you need to make contact with Southend United and see what their intentions are. It may be significant, maybe a significant part.
So Mike, are you content that is addressed via the playing pitch strategy rather than the open space? Okay, thanks. Any other points, councillors? Okay. This particular report is for noting. Members, can I record this as noted, please? Moving on to item 9, the infrastructure delivery plan stage 1 report. As you know, as I mentioned earlier, this has been withdrawn because it is impacted by what we received a couple of days ago, and as there will be no point discussing it because we cannot come to any conclusions on it as it stands. So this item has been withdrawn. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes our business for this evening. Thank you for attending. I'm sorry it was a short menu this time, but I hope you understand the reasoning behind that. Thank you very much. Meeting closed at 8:10.